Hello, and welcome back to Mammalian Anatomy at Keuka College. Today we're going to be starting our video series on the respiratory system. It's going to be a relatively short lecture series. We're just going to be looking at the organs of the respiratory system, and then we're going to discuss ventilation, or the process of breathing. And so in this video, what we're going to do is we're just going to introduce the respiratory system and talk about how the respiratory system is classified based on functional characteristics and anatomical characteristics, and just learning a little bit about its overall functions. All right, let's get into it. So the respiratory system is going to have a lot of different functions for the body, but it has three primary functions. The first is ventilation. Ventilation in physiology is defined as a process of bringing air into and out of the alveoli of the lungs. And so it's going to be what we typically consider breathing, bringing air in and out. The second is respiration, which the system is named after. Respiration is going to be a process of gas exchange, and the primary gases that are going to be exchanged are carbon dioxide and oxygen. Oxygen is a necessary component for making energy within the mitochondria. It acts as the final electron acceptor within the electron chain. And so therefore we need oxygen to make energy in the form of ATP for our body. And we're going to get that through our respiratory system. A byproduct of making energy is carbon dioxide. And that carbon dioxide is formed because we take organic molecules such as glucose and break them down to harvest its energy and harvest its electrons within the mitochondria. And the carbon dioxide is produced as a byproduct. There is a normal level of carbon dioxide that is needed for the body. However, the excess carbon dioxide has to be removed. And that's because carbon dioxide is closely linked to the pH of the body. Increasing or decreasing carbon dioxide can actually increase and decrease the pH of the body. So therefore, it has to be tightly regulated by the respiratory system. More on why it's related to pH when we get into vertebrate physiology. But just know for now that one of the primary functions is respiration, the exchange of oxygen for carbon dioxide. There are two types of respiration: external respiration and internal respiration. External respiration is the exchange of gases between the lungs and the blood. And so it's going to be within the respiratory system itself. And then internal respiration, on the other hand, is going to be near the tissues. So the circulatory system is going to carry the oxygen to the tissues such as muscles, hepatic cells, all sorts of different cells of the body, and that's where that gas exchange will occur. So remember, external respiration is going to be between the lungs and the blood, while internal respiration is going to be the exchange of gases between the blood and the tissues. And the last function is transport of gases. It's going to work, the respiratory system is going to work very closely with the cardiovascular system to be able to transport these gases through the circulatory system or the cardiovascular system. And that is because these gases, for the most part, are insoluble in blood, So what will have to happen is there'll have to be different mechanisms involved to carry those gases through the blood. And again, this is something that we're going to cover more in vertebrate physiology, and you may be covering a little bit in your biochemistry courses. But in this video series, what we're going to do is we're just going to focus on ventilation. What is kind of the physics involved in breathing, and how do we actually move gases in and out of our lungs? In addition to these three primary functions, there are going to be some secondary functions that the respiratory system can do. Before I move on to that slide, can you think of some examples that the respiratory system does in addition to breathing and gas exchange and those sorts of things? Yep. So some of them include protection and immunity, and then sound production and olfaction. So the respiratory system is going to be responsible for protection and immunity. It's going to be one of our first line of defense in our immune system. And how does it do this? First and foremost, within the nasal cavity, there is going to be nose hairs that are going to filter the air that it comes in. And also the shape of the nasal cavity causes the air to spin and rotate. And that spinning action will actually fling debris and pathogens and all sorts of things into the mucus that is being produced by the epithelial cells of the respiratory system. And there it's going to collect any pathogens before it enters deeper into our respiratory tract. Another thing it does is that it has a mucociliary escalator. The cells that are within our respiratory tract, for the most part, are going to be ciliated pseudostratified columnar cells. And those cilia are going to be capable of sweeping material up and out of the respiratory tract. And so material will get actually stuck into the mucus that is being produced by this tissue, and the cilia will sweep that mucus up towards the pharynx, and eventually, for the most part, that mucus will be swallowed and be digested by our digestive tract. But sometimes when we're really sick, we have to cough it up and things like that. So that's how it's responsible for immunity. There are also immune cells within the respiratory system, and when we go into the cell types that are found in the alveoli deep within the lungs, we'll be able to see how it can provide that immunity. Sound production. So the respiratory system is going to be responsible for sound production, vocalization using our vocal cords, also different sounds that can be produced by the mouth. So we'll go into that in a little bit more detail when we talk about the larynx. And in the last chapter, we learned about olfaction, the nerves and receptors that are responsible for our sense of smell. Are going to be located in our respiratory system. Lastly, the respiratory system does play a really important role in regulating the pH of our blood and our body. That's because carbon dioxide is closely linked to our pH levels. And again, we'll learn more about that when we get into vertebrate physiology. Okay. So Now that we've looked at the different functions, let's talk about how the respiratory system is divided into anatomical and functional divisions. Meaning that we can take the organs of the respiratory system and divide them based on location and structure, and then also we can divide them based on what they do. So let's kind of talk about those. The first division is the anatomical division, and the anatomical division can divide the organs into the upper respiratory tract and the lower respiratory tract. And these tracts are going to have different functions. The upper respiratory tract's major functions are going to be to warm, moisten, and filter the incoming air, so it conditions the air that is coming into the respiratory tract. And these will include structures such as the nasal cavity, so the cavity within our nose, our paranasal sinuses that are going to surround our nasal cavity, and our pharynx. The pharynx is our back of our throat. The lower respiratory tract, on the other hand, is going to have functions such as ventilation, moving air in and out, external respiration, and immunity, just to name a few. And this will include things such as our larynx. Our larynx is going to be our voice box, and that's going to help produce sound. Also, it can actually have a very special structure that will direct food into our digestive tract rather than our respiratory tract, and we'll talk about that when we get into the organs. We have the trachea, which is our windpipe, and that trachea will branch into a tree-like structure, and that will form bronchi and bronchioles, so big branches and little branches. And at the ends of those branches, we're going to have alveoli. And alveoli is where most of the gas exchange will occur. So for this slide, I would like you to know what organs are included in the upper respiratory tract and lower respiratory tract. And what are the general functions of these tracts? We can also divide the respiratory system based on functional divisions, based on what they do. And we can include them as the conducting portion and the respiratory portion. The conducting portion's job is to do ventilation, and that's it. It's just to move air in and out of the alveoli. And this is going to start at the nasal cavity and will end at the bronchioles. And so all those organs that lie in between are going to do conduction and just move air in and out of the lungs. Then we're going to have the respiratory portion. The respiratory portion is going to be responsible for that external respiration, the exchange of carbon dioxide and oxygen between the lungs or alveoli and the blood. And this is going to include the smallest bronchioles. The smallest bronchioles will actually start with this respiration process, but the majority of respiration is going to occur within the alveoli of the lungs. So that concludes our introduction into the respiratory system. We looked at the primary functions and the secondary functions of the respiratory system, and we looked at the anatomical and functional divisions of the respiratory system. In our next video, we're going to look at the organs of the respiratory system and go one by one, looking at its anatomy and its function. Thank you for listening, and I hope you have a wonderful day. And as always, be good to yourselves, okay? Bye-bye.